This session is about greenwashing and the reality of sustainability data. We are joined by three speakers today. Unfortunately, Duncan Baker-Brown cannot be with us today, but we do have three excellent speakers joining us. We have Fabian Klein, Legal Director of Pinsent Masons from Germany. We also have Florian Foster, who's a Director of Bauhaus Earth, who's also based in Germany. And then we also have Alex Lines, Associate Director of Webb Yates in the UK. Thank you very much for all joining us. And you have your videos on as well. I'm now going to call upon each of our panelists to give a short introduction before we move into our panel discussion, where we will talk about this topic and hopefully also answer a few questions from the audience as well. So if I can ask Fabian to start with a short introduction of greenwashing, how it is categorized and handled from a legal perspective. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Natasha, and thanks for having me on the panel and in the discussion today. Like I said, I'm a legal director in Pinsent Masons in Germany. I come from an IP background, and what we do is we advise clients on a lot of communication issues, I would say, around what they are able to communicate and what they're not able to communicate, especially in the ESG realm. So yeah, what is ESG, or what is greenwashing from a legal perspective? The bad news is there is no uniform definition for it. There is no legal project or legal concept that says that is greenwashing and that isn't. First of all, there are a lot of different terms around it. There's greenwashing, where you say you're overstating something that you can't really bring in the end. There's green hushing, when you say you're not communicating as much about your environmental aspects as you maybe should have, in order to conceal that you're maybe not doing enough. There's green lighting, when you say I have product A, which is very, very green, but you by that conceal that the rest of your portfolio is very, very brownish. You have green crowding, where you say that you are part of an industry group maybe, or an industry initiative that is doing a lot for the environment, and by that concealing that you as an individual company are not maybe as ambitious as you could be. So there are a lot of different concepts what greenwashing might be, and no uniform definition for it. That's the bad news. The good news is that basically everybody who's listening in today is an expert on greenwashing, because in the end, from a legal perspective, it's all under the subject of misleading advertising. Are you promised something that you are not receiving? Are you is something communicated that in fact is not true in the end? And I'm not talking about alternative facts true. I'm talking about what is your understanding that you have of the claim that is made. Is that true, or is it not true? Can it be backed up by scientific evidence? Is it maybe just overshooting in some areas, and there's a core to it that is right? All these aspects will be in the end decisive on whether from a legal perspective it's greenwashing, and that is forbidden already now, or whether you're just making something that is maybe not as clear in the communication as it might be. What from a legal perspective can the consequence of greenwashing be is, first of all, that you're not allowed to do this communication, to make that claim anymore. Second, there can be damages from either administrative bodies, or from clients, from customers, from everybody else. And there's of course the reputational damage that comes with it, and that maybe is in the end often the bigger thing to it. I wanted to, in the brief time that I still have left, make a very, very short overview of how the EU is trying to tackle greenwashing, and that's basically by two directives. One that is already enforced, already adopted, and has to be implemented in the next 2 years, and one that is probably coming down the line, the so-called Empowerment Directive, and the little bit more famous Green Claims Directive. And without going into too much detail, I just want to point out to 2 or 3 main issues that these regulations will bring. For one, it will not be possible anymore to make generic claims like net zero or carbon neutral, or anything that is not really backed up by some more information. Or if you just say your product or your project is green, that will not be allowed by any degree anymore. The second one, and maybe the biggest change that the law will see in the coming 2 or 3 years, is that every claim will have to be pre-approved by an independent verifying agency. There's still a lot of questions around how this will be done, what kind of data you have to provide, who will bear the costs, what time frame should you calculate for that, and so on. But in the end, it is very, very likely that this regulation will come, that every claim you make about a product, about your company, that is environmentally related will have to be pre-approved, and that's a stark contrast to any other advertising that you make today. And the third one I want to point out, because we heard a lot about standards that are applied throughout different countries or that are in the making. The third one kind of contradicts to that, is that no private environmental labels will be allowed anymore. So it will only be possible to have, from an EU perspective, EU official environmental labels put on the product, put in the advertising, but not something that is an industry association or a company itself has come up with, but that appears to be an official label. So that's just my very, very brief introduction. I overran already, I'm afraid. So let me just finish by saying I think that the greenwashing topic will be the most scrutinized one in advertising and in company communication in the coming years.
Fabulous. There's a lot to say on the topic, so I'd be upset if you didn't overrun a little bit, but thank you, Fabian. Moving on next to, we're going on to Florian. So the steps we can take as engineers to be the most effective in achieving low carbon design and focusing on engagement, and the benefits of understanding material flow. So those are two topics that I have as crib sheet notes, but Florian, you've got 3 minutes. Give us your information.
Thank you very much, Natasha.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you everybody listening in. It's a pleasure to be here, actually. And I think I pick up on Fabian's, actually, in a way, as a framework. It's nice to have him introducing it. I think greenwashing really is, for me as a structural engineer, which is my background, even at Bauhaus, is using a mindset where we actually know we can do a lot better. We know we have effective tools. We have a big understanding at the moment, actually, what are the big movers of decarbonizing building and design. We have a tendency, partially because of the carbon debates and LCA, and we love the numerical tools, to maybe lose ourselves already in data. But with leading the design, we can early on really make quite influential decisions on the big picture decarbonization of the construction industry and buildings, i.e. with the whole discussion of dimensions, the grid, the material choices, where we really, in the early phases of the design, it's a bit similar to the conceptual design discussions we sometimes have in this institution, we have an excellent tool and we have a really disproportionate impact on effectiveness, actually changing the way we can design as structural engineers. So I would, following the previous discussions and also the overall, I think, discussions one has about it, I think we should really try to go back to the leadership we can have as engineers, to basically use the first concept design phase, the discussions with the client, to engage in the overall volume and the material usage and space usage of our particular projects. Are there more effective and efficient ways to transform materials into a built environment, however we want to use it? I mean, there's a big debate about build less, build nothing. These are built in a smart, effective way. I think these are the bigger tools, which in a way we as engineers in this round should take with us. I think the numerical analysis is super important. The evidence-based is super important. This will come out. But if we have done the fundamental parameters not right, I think then it becomes very quickly greenwashing, because then we build an overall building, which it might be better than one which hasn't been built with any sort of sustainability in mind or regenerative building in mind, but we have lost the big points. And I think the only impact we can make on transforming the building industry is making big points. And that's where I would always compare it with the tobacco industry or the oil industry. We're in an industry which in some aspects is, from an environmental point, toxic, and we have tools to sort of detoxify it in a way. And it's really not about if our cigarette has a better filter or not, but actually how do we get somewhere where we don't use a cigarette, for example. And I think that's the interesting thing at Bauhaus Earth, which is more of a science body than only an engineering body, where we constantly challenged to have this dialogue between empirical needs and data and how we bring that back into the design, where the design, I would say, habits, our habits as engineers, now we step back, we let somebody else define the concept, we evaluate it, help them, but then often the ship has already sailed down the road where we can only have a minimum impact. So that's one answer to this, probably also too long, to this first little prop. And the second one is actually we should also be really mindful that when we have new products, for example, when we have instruction engineering, the entire debate about timber, fabricated timber, glue-laminated timber, the timber as this solution, should be mindful if we advertise ourselves as engineers solutions which we think we can quickly solve the climate crisis. And I'm pretty uncertain about this. I think I often think there's always a bigger story. The way the industry is organized, it wants to do mass production very quickly for a huge scale. And we're always in danger to endorse a product as a solution where we actually in the back of our mind know this isn't really yet a solution. It's far more systemic, far more complex. And timber is a classic one where we have the sustainable forestry, the way it's used, and you can either, it can be, hopefully it's helpful, but it's certainly not a solution. And we should be mindful in a way, because historically, when you look back at the history of engineering, we often had these materials where we thought, oh, it opens totally new opportunities. Like concrete was a bit like that. And we saw this is a solution, solves everything. But 80, 90 years later, we realized we built ourselves an environment which actually had a lot of effects which we now have to mitigate. So I think the systems thinking is something which is probably a challenge, but also quite enjoyable for us as structural engineers, because fundamentally we can do it, I think, if we upskill ourselves in these different directions. And I think I probably reached my limit or over, Natasha.
Yeah.
Good,
But you, again, you have lots to say, so that's all right. We've got around about an hour for this session. And last but certainly not least, we've got Alex, who will be talking a little bit about the structural engineer's twin role of doing and understanding numbers and data, but also interpreting for clients as well. So over to you, Alex.
Hi, thanks, Tash. Yeah, I'm a structural engineer at Webb Yates. We do a lot of low carbon design, both of standard materials, but also slightly more interesting materials like timber and stone and things like that. And I think the structural engineers are we really have two main roles to fill. The first is kind of the keeper of the numbers. I mean, we all like a good spreadsheet. We all like crunching through the numbers. And we're kind of very responsible and accurate with our working out all the finer details of carbon calculations. But the second one I think is equally important, and it's the interpreters of that data. It's all well and good to have exactly super precise information, but unless we know what to do with it, we're kind of just shooting in the dark or getting too bogged down in those numbers. I think it's by bringing those two things together that engineers can really have the biggest impact, that we can do the numbers, make sure that everything is correct and understand them, but also then be able to interpret that for our clients and be able to present back the information. And that's really where we get to then use that data to persuade, to make points, to really start pushing for a low carbon agenda. And the way to do that is to really understand all the materials, the life cycles, exactly where our materials come from, how they're made, which parts of that are important, both for carbon and for wider sustainability and biodiversity impacts, and then be able to present that in a responsible and accurate way to our clients, and then be able to push for change by using that information. What we don't want to be doing is using incorrect data or rough data to try and persuade clients, and we don't want to be getting too bogged down in the numbers and just presenting thousands and thousands of numbers, which doesn't persuade anyone. By bringing those two things together, I think is where structural engineers can make the biggest change.
Great. Thank you very much. So we've heard from our three panelists, and it feels like there's almost like a balance that needs to be struck from, greenwashing. It's important that we are aware of what we're claiming, but then also having the wherewithal to push for innovative decisions and systemic thinking. And I kind of see these two areas as being quite difficult to square. How can we have a leap of faith in an innovative solution if we need to also upskill ourselves into fully understanding what is green hushing, what's greenwashing? It can be potentially a bit overwhelming for people who may be listening on the call. So I invite one of the speakers, if you want to put your hands up or if you want to talk over each other, that's fine. But really trying to understand how we can develop confidence in using innovative materials in this area where we can be under greater scrutiny and feel like we don't have as much freedom to really have systemic change in the way that we approach engineering. Yep. Oh, Alex got there first, Florian.
You can say all the things I missed off.
Yeah.
I think it starts with regulation, I think, and having agreed standards, agreed terms that we're using to describe these things. I mean, as Fabian was saying, there is starting to be better and better descriptions of all of the greenwashing pitfalls, but also of all the terms that we should be putting towards, like carbon neutral, net zero. All those things are starting to get hashed out in terms of that's not just a word, that means this exact thing. And so hopefully that helps us to have those conversations without having to say, here's an entire research paper to back up the thing I'm saying. We can just say, it's this, we've done the work. We can show you that if you want, but you understand what we're saying. So I think that's kind of the first step. But then I think that following on from that, we do just need to get a bit braver at being a bit more outspoken and being challenged and being able to answer those challenges. I mean, if we know the data, we know that what we've worked out is correct, then we shouldn't be afraid of presenting that to clients, trying to push for change. And if they're challenged, great, we can have that discussion and we should be welcoming people to challenge us. But we shouldn't be getting bogged down with, oh, I need to go and do a PhD to understand this, because otherwise we're never going to be able to move forwards.
Thank you. Florian.
Yeah, I think it's not as risky as we think. If you, I think we need to take that chance to influence, as I said before, influence a brief, and at really early stages, the architect, the other members of the team, I think Lindsay said it right in the beginning, it's a total team effort. If we have a project, for example, we often have a project where we can talk the client out, have a double basement, for example, if the arranges this, is infinitely more effective than talking to him if like my column is a certain more reliable concrete grade or sustainable. So that's what I mean with we have to have the courage to say, go in the room, this is how you really, and we have the data for it. Most of us here on this call probably know which grades for which materials are more sustainable now. This is sort of the fundamental, like the red book knowledge. You should be like, there's this knowledge, this tool, and we don't wait for the other members of the design team, if it's a facade designer or if the architects who say, yeah, we want to have you come in at a later stage. And I think that's so, and that is not really as risky to me, because it's a power thing and an influence thing on how you convince people. And then you obviously and the skill then is, as Alex said, to present it also as an opportunity for the designers who have to design with these new parameters, and that we bring our skill back into that one. I think this is where I think somebody said early on, there's a huge potential for innovation and creativity in this subject if we say this is a valuable parameter for us to decarbonize the design we do. And I think that's a story we can tell really early on, because the buildings will change and the materials we use will change slowly. But we have to be there right in the first discussions, I think. Otherwise, it becomes sort of a bit like, yeah, we follow with the numbers, and then the numbers won't be good enough. Okay.
Thanks. Fabian, was there anything that you wanted to add to?
I think I can follow this up by I don't see it as contradictory as you might have posted in the question intentionally, but I think the key to it is really transparency, that you are transparent in what are the effects that you want to achieve, what are the effects that you can achieve, what are the things that you cannot achieve maybe, or that you cannot influence. And then I think it goes together really well that you can say we have an innovative solution, or we want to go for an innovative solution. Maybe it has some disadvantages in other areas that we would want to avoid, but this is paid off with other advantages. But if you communicate about this in a transparent way so that everybody can understand it and that the client can make an informed decision, basically, then I don't think that these two kind of poles are separate to each other.
That's very encouraging to hear. I feel like I was being a little bit devil's advocate, but wanted to make it clear. Florian.
Yeah, one question for Fabian, actually. And I think one tool which we as engineers very rarely can use, but it's super powerful if one has a financial assessment early on of the value of these buildings in the future, because that's what we come across with ESG discussions, with client discussions. They're actually not so interested in the sustainability. They're interested in that their building doesn't lose their value. And obviously, if we're designing a building which saves them something today, because we're using the same structure, but we have an alternative, we say maybe a little bit more complex today, but it's infinitely more valuable in 15 years. You can write insurance companies, you can guarantee this, you have much more certainty. That's would be a really powerful tool, I think, for us to be fed to us, or we have this in the discussion. I don't know what Fabian thinks about the financial future assessment of the buildings with greenwashing. Do they actually lose value more quickly because people suddenly see it's not worth it?
Yeah, absolutely. They lose the value of the buildings, but also I think even more importantly, the companies that stand behind that lose value more importantly and lose credibility, and thereby then in the end also value in what they are doing. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the entire, not the entire, but a lot of the European legislation goes around directing money into the right direction, into green decisions. And what I outlined before has a little bit of a different, the new regulations have a little bit of a different focus. They are more focused on the customers so that they can make the green decisions. But it's only one piece of the puzzle. The other one other important piece is that the financial flows shall go into the green decisions. So I think it will not only be a good argument to say your building will be worth more in 15 years, so that you have the long-term effects, but it will also help you in getting loans in the first place and being more efficient now.
Alex, do you have maybe examples or anything to add about that that value aspect there?
I'm trying to think of the future world where we get to actually value this properly. I was kind of thinking of the famous M&S back and forth that we've had in London, and thinking of in the future, if it did get knocked down and then rebuilt as something new, I'm sure the new thing they would be talking about would be incredibly low carbon and green and things, and potentially forgetting about the thing that they knocked down. I don't know how good we are at being able to really remember and weigh things up like that.
Definitely. So one other point I wanted to bring up is definitely because of how fast-paced the knowledge is developing in this particular area. I know that some of the things that I held as true in 2020, 2021 have been disproved as being the most sustainable option. And that means that because of my level of knowledge and also the level of knowledge of the industry in general, I could have been accused of greenwashing. So now when I talk about certain topics and show certain slides, I need to be very careful and say, look, that was my understanding, Beer Happel's understanding at the time, but the whole industry has moved on. I wonder if there are probably other ways of, if anyone on this call has sort of listened to certain greenwashing claims, and how you would encourage them to address them with the transparency that we need, because I can imagine that lots of people on the call held certain beliefs maybe even 6 months ago, and due to new information, actually how they would have treated something is a bit different now. I know it's probably quite a vulnerable thing to say, but it would be good to know one of your thoughts on it, or if you've come across something similar and how you've addressed it.
Well, I think if I may, it's you can only make the statements at the time based on the knowledge that you have at that time, and if it later turns out to be wrong, I don't think that this should be considered as greenwashing. And even from a legal perspective, I think it would not suppose that you then stop making the wrong statements and start making the right statements. That's a presumption to it. But I think that's not as much as a problem. And I would also want to go a little bit to the bigger picture that Florian alluded to before. I think as a society, as an industry, we can only progress if we are allowed to make these mistakes, if you want, and if we are allowed to correct the views that we had in the past. And certainly in terms of transparency and in finding the right solution, I think it's even better to say out loud that, well, my belief from 6 months ago is not correct anymore because of this and this, because that's how knowledge is spread around and how progress is ultimately made.
Yep, Florian.
Yeah, I could follow that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I find the institution such a good leadership institution in a way. Basically, you will progressively in collecting our knowledge, we're sharing it in these panels. And so maybe that's something which can be between various partners, even be more opened up to say, actually, yes, of course, I had a different base of knowledge and also different reference projects a year ago or 2 years ago. And bit like maybe like you do in the structural failure reporting of SCOS, you could run and have a subgroup there. Maybe it says greenwashing or green development of green knowledge. So this is sort of very openly shared, not only the individual final data, but these different stories, because there's so many different. I mean, I find it now when we work with new regenerative materials, this is a total learning process. And the quicker we share this, I think the more effective it become. Because I think Fabian said it, I think the industry will sort of follow the inventions and the leads from us as the designers. As we are in a way, the industry in some parts, it is unfortunately pretty slow in change. But if we come up with certain materials or solutions and have an opportunity to test it and successful, then suddenly everybody wants to try this. And that way you just have to look at some of the history of some of the major construction materials. When they first started, they started from people who actually no reference, and then suddenly became super successful. So we're doing it by ourselves. We do like various earth blocks, structural earth block with applications, with load bearing as well. So it's certain made from local materials. So in a way, it's the field is so open at the moment to look for these more sustainable elements, which we then feed back into the system. And I think that's where we totally it's on us to actually go through this loops of, yes, I could have done better, I didn't know all, and then you pick yourself up and do the next thing and the next thing. But as long as we don't lose that spirit of invention and enthusiasm for it, and I think for me that's a major thing.
Cool. Thank you. Alex, I see you've come off mute.
I think there's a couple of good examples, general examples that have been out there recently. I think sequestration of timber is something that's come on a long way in the last 5 years, even in terms of our understanding of it, our reporting of it. I think you go back a couple of years and there was a lot of people claiming that all their buildings were carbon negative, until started to have those discussions and go, well, actually, we've not actually really grown any new trees yet since you've just finished your building. So it's not really yet. And even in the future, you don't know what you're going to be doing with that timber. And I think it's quite a good example because it really came from a lot of people making those claims based off the calculations that they've done, and then people challenging them and discussions happening off the back of that, which then led to deeper understanding of the principles and how that works and how to calculate it correctly and report it correctly. And so I think you see it a lot less now of someone saying, oh, it's a timber building, so it's carbon negative, and I don't need to worry about anything else here. I think the other example is there's a lot of buildings probably outside of the structural engineering realm, which are claimed to be net zero based off their operationally net zero. And that's either because they've got enough PV panels to balance out their electricity use, which is great, or it could just be paying for a bunch of offsets and not really doing anything else. And neither of those are kind of true net zero things. The firstly, because it's not really thought about the embodied carbon, and the secondly, because you're kind of just throwing to uncertain offsets that might exist or might just be a tree that you're buying that never actually grows off on the other side of the world. So I think that one is still up there in being contended, being kind of argued about of what you can claim as being net zero and what you can't. And I think that one's almost a sort of white lie, because you may have a net zero building, but if it's not embodied carbon net zero, it's only operationally net zero, then you're kind of not telling the full story. And whoever you're telling that to might need to really understand it a bit deeper to be able to tell the difference between those two things. So I think at the moment that's being kind of challenged in the industry a bit, but maybe not there out in the public. And it's kind of up to us to be able to explain to our clients, right, here is the difference between those things, and here's why we think we should be doing the all-encompassing version, right?
Yeah. Go, Florian. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what Alex said about timber. And I would add on this one, it's a similar discussion with circular design, which obviously is a big part of trying to work with the climate emergency and respond. And there, this whole debate, circular design for the future, everybody's trying to find these lovely buildings which suddenly miraculously going to be retaken down, or circular design of existing. And I think that's another really interesting debate. What is sort of potentially greenwashing? Because we can't. I mean, it's super hard to design a fully circular future building with the components and standards we want, or the usage we want now. But it's obviously also hard. But there's been some fantastic examples, I think, in London also, when you follow it, from reusing major parts of structural elements and a smart update, and that obviously is including foundations, which in the German context would be really difficult to get them past the insurers. But in engineering terms, this is all possible and it can be done. So this is actually another big chunk, I think, where the greenwashing, or how do we interpret the building stock and change it, there's a lot of material there. There's probably also a lot of good projects nowadays there, where we can see we have so much valuable building stock, which through a slight adaptation, we can avoid greenwashing, instead of putting a new scheme in for the future where we actually don't have the evidence yet, if that's really in 20, 30 years time, if anybody takes that down and can actually do it. And timber is a classic one there. Okay.
Wanting to sort of build on what Alex was saying about things like zero carbon in operation versus net zero carbon versus carbon neutrality, which is also different. It's quite likely that you have consultants who don't know the nuance and differences between those, speaking to clients who don't know the nuance and differences between those. So even though there is discussions between consultants and clients and other people, because there isn't that knowledge in the system, that we're not necessarily progressing as far. What have you seen where this potential sort of, I don't want to say the blind leading the blind, but I can't think of a different phrase for it, is happening, and whether you've seen ways that we can kind of break that chain and actually move into the system and get that knowledge in there, or if you have any comments and don't think that happens.
I think we're on the cusp of that happening more, probably.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm struggling to think of examples where, and maybe it's just because it's all behind closed doors, so you don't see it, but where it really is the blind leading blind, and not someone kind of interpreting the data in a creative way, but they kind of know what they're doing. I think most claims that we see, at least in the engineering fields, are kind of backed up with some data, and they may be cherry picking that data, but at least there is kind of data there. I think probably more in other areas that Fabian probably has some great examples of, where it's a bit more someone said something and doesn't really know what it means at all.
Yeah, I think that happens, but I think in most of the cases, there are, of course, the black sheeps out there that say some things and know that they are not true. But I think in most of the situations, it's rather that you have, like Alex just said, you have a certain aspect that you can back up with data and with evidence and everything that you need. And you then just are not, let's say, carefully enough in how you word it, how you put it out there on the street. And then it becomes kind of misinterpreted or can be misinterpreted and becomes more than it actually was in the beginning. So I think, yes, there is the risk that everybody has its own interpretation of these terms. Like we all have a different kind of interpretation of what greenwashing means. So I find it very interesting, Florian, that you have a very, very different concept to what the legal concept is on what greenwashing is. A very interesting one. And that, of course, happens with all these different claims as well. But I don't see that there is much of a way out of this, because you can just make up new terms every day if you want. And there will never be like an encyclopedia where everything is in there that can be used. So I think it really comes down to, again, transparency. And when you're confronted with a claim, that you say, okay, what exactly do you mean by that? And think a little bit more about what your understanding is, and if the understanding of the other one is the right one, and if that is what you really want to achieve or not.
Cool. Go, Florian. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do actually, unfortunately, from my experience as a structural engineer, agree very much with Alex. I think there's a huge, and also because the way LCAs and assessment can be generated so quickly now out of these models, is a very few people who have a fundamental understanding what is the data which was in there, is it actually truthful or not? And that's not, we haven't got the time to explain, to question it. We know, I know that you need to have probably with instruction engineering, with the way loads work, it takes quite a while to understand. I mean, it's kind of, you just tell people this is loads. Now, the LCA data is not just, I mean, obviously everybody can use it very easily, but to interpret, it's a different thing. And I think that is especially if one is asked to provide a lot, to have somebody from the beginning kind of say, this explains it in a way people can understand it, it's appropriate to the project, and then later on interpret it, what could have been done, and then also maybe look at the total building is the other thing. We can easily say, well, the structure is a lot, and the envelope has another very high value, because that's often not really shadowed, or we find that very often. We have also actually done that when I did the structural engineering capacity I have, only when we have a really focus on it and say this is because the client also wants it a little bit more in depth. It's certainly different quality than we just said, let's knock off a few LCA analyses and give a bit of an appendix in the report. And I think, and that can be easily done, because you still get in I don't know what's it like in the UK now, but in Germany, you still get your DGNB or your like your little tokens quite easily in some ways. It's in built embodied carbon terms.
One last point. I think to speak to the requirement for sort of nuance and the trade-offs that Lindsay mentioned in her keynote speech. One, there might be sort of dissent amongst a design team where maybe one party thinks that the biodiversity aspects are more important than, for example, the carbon aspects, or actually it's fine that we're using more embodied carbon because the building is actually now more usable for certain folk. I was wondering, even though it's slightly different from greenwashing, but I think that potentially these kinds of trade-offs, when maybe talked about in more of a combatant way, could be considered ways of going, oh, they don't care about the sustainability, the biodiversity is terrible. But actually, if you were to dive into it, in terms of carbon emissions and in terms of inclusive design, a particular design might be great. I was wondering if there are any examples of this kind of nuance or trade-off that you've seen, either more generally, or what your opinions are in terms of understanding the trade-offs without necessarily coming across as if it's not all sunshine and rainbows, essentially, with a project. Go, Florian. You're on mute.
Yeah, maybe what I found very interesting the last few years and also the last few months, especially with Power, this what under the material flow analysis, which is a big thing, which is not really the same as carbon at all. We can have a material which is probably has very low carbon emissions, but it's moved around the world for various reasons and is depleted, and it's absolutely essential for biodiversity or certain societies. That is something that people outside the construction look into. I think that's something I completely follow or can see your point. I think it's a really important point that we don't think we solve carbon, we have solved it.
Yeah.
And firstly, you won't take society with you there, I don't think so. And secondly, I think you then it becomes really like you have one parameter again, and there's so many you missed. It's so I think, but I haven't really. I think it's what Lindsay's opening speech was really nice. I think she reminded everybody that we're in a sort of a specialized discipline, but we're also in a system. And that system thinking is especially with materials we use, it's just something which I think we have to sort of integrate, upskill ourselves, learn a lot of new things, because I think 15 years ago we didn't need to do the systems thinking as structural engineers. Nobody asked that question, and I guess you could have a career without doing it. But I think now it is, I think, part of the why question, what is appropriate, has become really it's demanded, I think, from us if we want to basically lead the profession.
Alex?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we're at the moment in a stage where carbon is very important, and we're trying to get to grips with it and its calculation and how to accurately and honestly work it out. But we do need to not forget about all the other elements of biodiversity and climate depletion, as you said. And I think that we need to remember that we're designing buildings for hundreds of different elements and briefs and requirements. You know, when we're designing structures, we don't think, oh, we need to make it not deflect too much, but it could fall apart if you knock it in the wrong direction. We think about all of the things that could impact the building during its life, just as we need to be thinking about all of the impacts that our building is creating on society. I mean, I think we shouldn't be advocating, right, the lowest possible carbon building, sacrifice everything else. We need to be having the discussions where we weigh up all these things together. And I don't think that we should be, if we're honest about having those discussions, I don't think that we should be criticizing people for, oh, you haven't put a green roof on top of it, even though you've done a fabulous job of making a social welfare building for a really low cost for in a place that really needs it. But we do need to be honest about those things. We shouldn't be saying, oh, no, we did think about that, and actually it's more important to do one thing or another, and therefore we got rid of it completely. We need to be thinking about all the things together, and we can be prioritizing some of those things in different buildings as long as we've considered them all.
Thank you.
Maybe just to add to that, a slightly different aspect. I alluded before to the Green Claims Directive that is going to come, and one of the aspects in there is actually that if you advertise a certain positive environmental aspect, you're not allowed to leave out anymore which negative aspects it might have on different sides. So if, for example, if you advertise a TV, you can say it has the best picture and can just leave out that the sound is shitty. With environmental claims, that is tried to be tackled by the Green Claims Directive, that you actually have to look at the broader picture, see all the different elements, and then can make an informed decision about which way you want to go, and basically by that, which of these elements are the most important to you. So that is something that the EU at least has on its agenda as well. If it's that easily to be implemented as they see it, I would put a question mark behind it, but it's at least on the radar.
That's interesting. That's sort of similar to kind of food grading systems, where you can't just say, oh, it's really high in fiber, but has loads of sugar in it, and we just won't put the sugar part on the packet at all. That sounds interesting.
I think these grading systems are for the clients or for the users, and this very nice, very helpful to say this building is, this is a building. We can have the narrative of trying to be evidence-based, more sustainable for which story ever it is, if it's carbon or another aspect of the whole story. But it's not just a plug, but you can read it. I think that's also a really important part. And then the society will actually say it's not it's not such a challenge, because as Lindsay said, I think lots of people are frightened of changing the building because they're used to another type of historic type of building, or what the traditional type of building. But if things have to change, they have to come along with, we have to take them along with the change.
Right, thank you very much. We have 10 minutes left, and I'd like to ask you all a final question. Let's go in the same order as I introduced you. So starting with Fabian, what is one action we should all take tomorrow to effectively combat greenwashing?
I would say it's actually education and use your brain when you are confronted with some advertising slogans or some information, that you think about, okay, what does it actually mean? What is it supposed to mean? Can this actually be true or not? And challenge these kind of things, try to get to the bottom of what is meant by it and if it is true, because only by then, when you challenge the one who makes the claim with that you say, well, I'm not so sure you are actually saying what you want to say, or you're actually doing what you're saying. I think only by that it can be tackled in the end.
Cool. Moving on to Florian.
What's your question?
Oh, I'll say it again. What is one action that we should all take tomorrow to effectively combat
Okay,
greenwashing?
so I thought you had to differ. Yeah, okay, you had to differ. Okay, it was the same question. Sorry,
it was the same
sorry,
question.
Well, I would actually say embrace the situation, embrace the challenge of the climate emergency, and the softening of certain engineering parameters that we had, and some appearance of new parameters, and use our skill set at any stage of the career as aligned with people who try to be effective in this field. And it reminds me a bit of when I look at lightweight structures, or like low material structures from the 60s and 70s, or like these fantastic pieces which were done. People had some sort of courage to try new things out, and I see that. So I'm actually not worried at all about the engineering. I just think it's finding the right platform and group of people to see where the urban environment, the buildings are going to be in a few years' time, or a few decades' time, in a more sustainable way to respond to the changing environment, which is happening. So in some ways, I would the creativity and the knowledge and the data we all have now, and the collectiveness actually working together. I think this will be the action, just to throw myself into it or engage.
All right. Thank you very much. And then also Alex.
I'm going to change what I plan to say here to the opposite side, actually. I'm going to say be honest, because I think that not only are all of us engineers the people who are going to be challenging people and saying, hey, is your number right here? I think we're also going to be on the receiving end of it, and we should welcome that, and we should be honest with what we prioritized, what numbers we're achieving, where those are coming from, and have those discussions with other engineers in order to keep everybody honest and fair and able to be challenged. We don't want for everyone to suddenly be incredibly defensive about everything that they're working towards, and not be working together to try and get those numbers down and build a more sustainable future.
Right. Thank you. So the reason that I asked you that question is because I thought that from the introductions, a couple of people went over. So we actually have a couple more minutes where I might use this time to ask a couple of questions that we've had through from the Q&A. That's all right. So Fabian, we have you've used quite a few really interesting greenwashing terms. Where can those be found? Are they all from the greenwashing, the Green Claims Directive, or can we
No.
find them?
No, actually, none of that is a legal term.
Oh.
That is in the regulations. That's all just different ways of labeling different marketing activities, if you want. So it's just from the general press, it's from the internet, it's sometimes from court proceedings where it's presented in a way like that, but there are no legal terms around that, and also the edges of these things are very, very blurry. So it's not like there are definitions out there.
All right. Okay, then I sit corrected. I thought it was part of the Green Claims Directive, but cool. Okay, so if people want to know more about those, if they were to Google sort of greenwashing, green hushing, they should hopefully find a list of all those other ones as well.
And of course, also reach out to me if they want.
And also reach out to you. All right. Thank you for that. There was also a question for Florian about elaborating on your tobacco industry analogy. If you could do that. Have you used that before in your teachings, or have you is it one that you?
No, I'm not. I don't. I haven't. I've used it with clients in project meetings, and I've used it at Bowser's and in teams. I don't teach very much. Sorry, not lesson. But no, but it's when you look at the history of smoking, for example, it was in the 50s and 60s, it was advertised by the health industry as something which is calming and good. I mean, the NHS had fantastic campaigns. Please during pregnancy, please smoke because it keeps you more calm in the, I think, the 40s and 50s. And then obviously the industry knew for years that actually what they're doing is pretty harmful to the users. And that evidence for a long time was withheld. I mean, Fabian probably knows all the history of these various law cases. And then there was a disconnected timeline between the knowledge, the effects, the legal enforcement campaigns, a bit like climate change at the moment. You have, as in society, as things which move, groups move forward, knowledge moves on. In certain industries say, oh, we can have another year and wait. I use it sometimes when clients, especially large contractors, say, oh, well, the competition is doing this year. Let's do the same again. We have another year. And so that's a bit like that, like nobody wants to jump onto that and actually there's a change. You'd rather have like another year without change. And that is very much, I think, what the tobacco industry, in a way, did, in a way, to protect themselves or their immediate interest, and probably lost quite a bit on the long-term interest. I think if you really objective about scientifically about the effects of the built environment and carbon on the human health and planet. I mean, what happened in the last 50 years can't really be talked up. It can be talked up. We have a more comfortable lifestyle, but actually the effects on the planet have been pretty disastrous. So, and the knowledge has been around for 40 years, 30 years, and so a long time. That's why. But I think it's not a bad thing to use these really clear examples because then it is an emergency. It's not like something which we can push off.
No.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's definitely. And Alex, yeah.
I was going to say, in kind of response to that, the tobacco industry really started to be more honest when they got sued, right? What's the tipping point going to be for embodied carbon?
Yeah, I wanted to add to this as well. I think 15 or 20 years ago, nobody would have thought that you can force the big tobacco industry companies to put these horrible pictures on what used to be their main branding area. And then the legislation came out and changed that. And right before that, I wouldn't have thought that this was going to work. So I think maybe with the greenwashing or green hushing element, we are maybe at the same situation where it says there needs to be more legislation that forces you to put more information out there, to be more transparent, even if that information doesn't look very good for you in the first place.
That is a wonderful point to end on. Thank you so much, Fabian, Florian, and Alex. Hopefully I'll see a flurry of reaction emojis coming up. Thank you so much.